Last week, I was talking with a friend about the current pressure and inspiration women and mothers face to simplify their lives. And she brought up a really great point that simplification can lead to more overwhelm because it feels forced given the current circumstances of the world. There's pressure to combat our broken food system by making scratch-made food, pressure to bake bread, and pressure to build a garden. There's also a growing desire for mothers to homeschool their children. And all of these things are great if that's what works for you and what you want to do. But if you're doing this on top of a 9-to-5 job and other responsibilities, that desire and pressure to do more at home can be really exciting and overwhelming. And all of this is wrapped up in what's called, quote, simple living, but it isn't that simple if it creates more overwhelm. So today I'm sharing some of the ways I enjoy simple living without making life more complicated. One thing that I like to do to make life a little bit easier is to repurpose what I have and to repurpose what I know. So that way I'm not building in a brand new skill. A few weeks ago, I published a video about enhancing your skill set or building new skills as a homemaker or really just as a human being in the world. But you don't always have to be learning something new. You already know a lot and you can take what you have and what you know and transform it into something else. So in this case, or in this example, I used my leftover sourdough bread to make sourdough croutons. So I didn't really have to learn anything new here because basically I already have the bread and know how to make toast. So I'm using those two things to create something kind of new. So I just cubed up the bread into about 1/2-inch cubes, and then I drizzled it with olive oil, sprinkled it with salt and pepper, and a little Italian seasoning, and gave it a good stir. You don't really have to drench them in the olive oil, but just make sure that they are coated. I think roughly I used about 2 tablespoons of olive oil per cup of cubed bread. And then if you need to, just add a little bit more until they're coated. And then I put them on a preheated stone baking sheet. So I preheated it at 350. And then I took this really delicious shaved Parmesan that I got from Costco and crumbled it up and sprinkled it on top of the breadcrumbs and baked them until they were crunchy. About every 10 minutes or so, I took them out of the oven and just kind of stirred them around a little bit to make sure they were evenly toasted. And you can bake these until they are your desired doneness. I actually like my croutons a little bit crunchy on the outside and soft on the inside. If you want to throw it back, if you remember the delicious croutons that used to be on the Ruby Tuesday salad bar, that's how I like my croutons. So, but in any case, you can make them how you like or as crunchy as you want. But what this does is it allows me to use what I already have and repackage my skill set to create something new. And you don't even have to have homemade sourdough bread to do this at all. For sure, you can use store-bought bread. If you have a local bakery or a micro bakery you like to buy from, you can use that bread too. And I think sometimes what happens is this pressure to keep making our own things and make scratch-made food and do more at home feels like it creates more pressure on us to just do more, but we can do new things with what we already have. If you're in the creator space realm, you'll always hear about like repurposing your content. It's the exact same thing. Repurpose your skill set so it feels like you're doing something new, but you're actually just doing what you've always done with what you've always had. Sometimes this idea of simple living starts to get so simple that it's overcomplicated, like sourdough bread and canning food and all these different things. And you're like, how am I supposed to find the time to do these things? And I really encourage you to truly think about keeping it simple. Here I am just making some boiled eggs for snacks and for salads for our dinner later tonight. So we have scratch-made croutons and we'll have boiled eggs to snack on and for dinner. And I didn't really have to learn anything new. Now for boiled eggs, what I like to do is I like to put them in cold water, bring it to a boil, turn the water off, put a lid on, and let it sit for about 10 minutes. And that is it. So that's something that's really easy to do, an example of a way you can keep things really simple in your life without adding extra pressure or work. And if you can like double up on some of that stuff, for example, if you boil a dozen eggs, then you can have eggs for salads, eggs for snacks, eggs for egg salad sandwiches, right? You can use them in a lot of different ways. Cleaning is where I struggle the most with simplicity because I don't really like to clean that much and I have a hard time keeping up with that stuff sometimes. And if you remember, I published a video a number of months ago about my Dutch ovens and how I cannot keep my stove Dutch oven clean. I am trying at the suggestion of a viewer, barkeeper's friend, to clean my stove Dutch oven. And I will say this did work really well to get that grime and that sort of burned on stuff off of my Dutch oven. But for the life of me, I cannot get all of this stuff off. And this is where simplicity comes into play. Don't overcomplicate things like this. I just can't get some of that burned stuff off. And you know what I'm going to do? nothing. I'm just going to let it sit on there. I will clean it to the best of my ability and I'm going to move on with my life. Perfection will get me nowhere. And for most of us, those perfectionistic tendencies don't do a whole lot other than create a lot more work and a lot more frustration. So here I'm just scrubbing it with, I used a towel first and that worked. And then I also used a magic eraser and that worked a little bit better. But honestly, that's as good as it's going to get. And I'm okay with that. Simplicity sometimes requires a little bit of surrender. And hey, my Dutch oven now looks really rustic, so I guess it's a benefit, right? I am very guilty of oversimplifying cleaning so much that it becomes complicated, trying to make charts and schedules and all these sorts of things. And then it just becomes so complicated and such an overwhelming task to keep up with that it's not even easy to do anymore. And I don't want to do it at all. So really what I try to do is stick with the routine, lean into the repetition of things like dishes and sweeping and laundry, and do the things that need to be done for me to function in my life, and let go of the things that really just eat up my time and mental space and that really aren't affecting me. For me, those repetitive tasks sometimes do take some mental fortitude because I don't always love them. But when I do them, I actually feel like my life is more simplified because they're done. I don't have clutter to think about. I'm able to use my kitchen more easily. So really thinking about, quote, simple living for me often just requires doing the simple tasks over and over and over. I am chopping some romaine lettuce for dinner this evening. I am definitely guilty in the past of doing things like just chopping one head of romaine when I actually have 5 to chop because I feel rushed and pressured for time. So I just chop one, but then I have all these others that I have to chop later. So it actually increases my workload. So what I'm doing here is I'm just chopping all of it and rinsing all of it so it's done at one time, and then I can have salads for a few days. The day before, our main water line to our neighborhood broke. And so we're actually at this point on a boil advisory. So that's why I'm pouring water out of that pot, because I had to boil all the water that I was using. But normally I would just rinse it with water from the sink. But this was not part of my simple living, but it got the job done. I think this is a good example of why it's really important to lean into things that we know how to do and to keep our lives as simple as possible in ways that are realistic for us, because life is always going to have curveballs. Your water line might break, there might be an emergency, something is always going to happen because that is part of life. But if we are already really skilled at what we're doing and we're already really simplified our lives in ways that are truly simple and not overcomplicated, when the complications arise, all the things that we have to do day to day feel at least a little bit easier. Our garden renovation is in full swing. So my husband is building these raised beds, and he used a method of preserving the wood called soshugiban. You burn it. Some people call it sugaring, but I think the technical term is soshugiban. And basically you burn it, and that helps preserve untreated wood. And you can see my seedlings are well underway. So things are moving along in our garden. I think the last time that I shared my seeds, I only had flowers, and my veggie seeds are finally in. So I am planting peppers and tomatoes, different heirloom varieties in these containers. But gardening for a lot of people is a great pleasure, and for others it's a great nightmare. And it really depends on your personality and your time. But there are a lot of people who are feeling more of a call or a desire to grow their own food, but with things like 9-to-5 jobs and corporate life and the busyness that we just have in our lifestyles, it can be really overwhelming to think about having a garden. Gardening for me is really not extra work. I mean, technically, yes, it is more time and physical work, but it's a great joy in my life, so I don't mind doing it at all. But that's not the case for everybody. One of the tips I have for growing food but keeping it simple is to grow what you like to eat. I am guilty. In the past, I have grown things just because they were available or I thought I should, like eggplant. I grew all this eggplant one year, and it was actually a lot of work because I was doing container gardening, because at the time I lived in a townhome. And you know, I don't even like eggplant. I hate eggplant. Why would I even bother growing eggplant? So that's not something I'm going to do again. If I'm going to spend my time and my energy, which is extremely valuable and precious, I want to spend it on things that I love and that I'll actually eat and that my family and I will enjoy. And don't feel pressure to grow too much. I'm expanding my garden because that works for me. I find great joy in gardening, but I have had seasons in my life where my gardens have been very small and I only grew a few things because I just didn't have the time, I didn't have the physical space, and that's okay. So only grow as much as you want to and only grow what you will actually use, because that will honor and value your time and you will enjoy it more. Now, this year I am trying to grow as much as I can from seed because that is something I enjoy doing, but my seeds have been very disorganized. So I found this cute little seed storage box on Amazon. I'll leave a link for this in the description box below, but I'm getting my seeds organized because disorganization and clutter really throws me for a loop sometimes. And I was opening this drawer and there were seeds everywhere, so I just had to get them organized. So this has little containers. On the left, I have the seeds that I've already put into my seed starting soil. On the right, I have seeds that I'm not using because it's not season for them. And then in the front, these are all the seeds that I will be direct sowing. So this way, it's just easier for me to deal with my seeds, to know what I've already used, what isn't in season, and so on. Probably the thing that we think about the most as women and mothers, if that's who you are, is how to simplify dinner, especially Monday through Friday. So dinner is always a big question. What are we going to have? How am I going to make it? How long is it going to take? And one of my best pieces of advice, if you want my 2 cents, is to stick with something that you know works and that can work for lots of different things. And for me, that is breaded fried chicken or breaded fried food. And you can do any of this in the air fryer too. So if fried food isn't your thing, no problem, just use the air fryer. Today I am making a breaded fried sourdough chicken, and I actually made this in my air fryer maybe like a month or 2 ago on YouTube, so I'll leave that in the description box below and you can check it out. But in this case, I am seasoning flour, freeze-dried eggs. I have 1 egg of freeze-dried eggs in here. If you don't have freeze-dried eggs, just use 1 regular egg. And sourdough breadcrumbs. I showed how to make sourdough breadcrumbs on my blog and on YouTube. I'll leave links for that in the description box below. And that's just salt and pepper I'm seasoning it with. And then I am putting some neutral oil in my cast iron pan and heating it up to about 375. So to make sure that the oil is the right temperature, I like to use an electric thermometer. Any tool that removes guesswork is a useful way to simplify. I use this recipe for chicken breasts, chicken thighs, chicken tenders, fried green tomatoes, onion rings, you name it, I use it. So I don't even have to think about this. So all I do is I dredge the chicken, in this case it's chicken thighs, in some flour that's seasoned with salt and pepper, then shake off the excess flour. Then I dip it in egg to coat it in the egg. That egg is also seasoned with salt and pepper. I try to let the excess egg drip off, but sometimes that's a little bit tricky because it gets stuck to the flour, which is actually kind of the goal. And then I put the chicken into the breadcrumbs. So for this, I like to kind of mush the chicken down into the breadcrumbs and even pat some of the breadcrumbs on to help them adhere. I have this recipe for sourdough fried chicken on my blog at moonandmagnolia.com. You can check that out in the description box below. But you just get the breadcrumbs on there, pat them on, and then I just stick it on a plate while I do the other pieces of chicken. It's totally fine for it. In fact, I think they fry better when they rest a little bit anyway. I know for some of you watching, fried chicken A may not be your thing, or B, if you haven't made it a lot, it seems really complicated. But I'm sure you have something in your recipe and cooking repertoire that you know like the back of your hand that you can make today that's really simple with ingredients that you have in your house. You do not have to reinvent the wheel every single time you make something. You don't have to make a new recipe every single night for dinner. You don't have to make something new every single time you cook. You can double up on recipes and then have that for a couple of days. You can lean on what you know and use that and keep things really simple and within your skill set. There's a time and a place for learning new recipes, but Monday through Friday usually for me isn't it. Now here's the deal with frying chicken. It has to be 350 degrees to fry. If it's not, it'll be soggy. So let your oil get up to about 375, even maybe 385. So when you put the chicken in, the temperature drops, right? Because the chicken's cold, but that way it'll drop to 350. So you're frying at 350, even though you let it get all the way up to 375. You really don't want it to be below 350 because your chicken will get soggy and that's like kind of nasty. No one wants soggy fried chicken. So you can see here, my temperature is dropping after I put the chicken in. and if you need to adjust the temperature to bring the temperature up or down as needed. I let these cook for about, I'd say like 5 minutes on each side. To be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure. I kind of peek under and look to see if it's browning, and then I carefully use tongs and flip them over. Before I learned how to fry food, I'm actually from Western Maryland, but I lived in the South for about 20 years. So there is a little period of my life where I didn't know how to fry food, but I do now. And I have learned that when you are putting food in hot oil or flipping it, a little trick is to just keep it close to the oil. You never want to put the food in from up high because it could splash and burn you. So just make sure you are keeping the food low to the oil and turning it and making sure your chicken is done at 165. And this stuff was delicious. I tend to shy away from salads because I feel like you have to chop 500 things just to get one little bowl of salad. But if you already have everything ready to go, a salad is actually a really easy way to make dinner, and it's pretty healthy too. I like to think about scaffolding what I'm doing in the kitchen. So I made all of these parts throughout the day for a salad. And then also all of these things can be used for other meals. So I'm kind of building on what I already have. And that helps me simplify my meals throughout the week, making a few things that can be used in multiple ways. Now, I did most of this in one day in the margins of my day. And when I had little pockets of time, that worked for me on this particular day. But sometimes I do stuff on Monday, and then on Tuesday, I'll do a little more. And on Wednesday, I'll do something else. And then I combine all that stuff on Thursday for a meal. So do what works for you. Truly try to keep it simple. Don't feel like you need to reinvent the wheel. And always remember, you are doing a great job no matter what. Thank you so much for tuning into Moon and Magnolia's YouTube channel, where we elevate the everyday from scratch and at home. And I'll see you again next time.